The kingdom of Nuria sat nestled between the golden hills and silver rivers, a place where tradition danced with the wind and stories bloomed like the vibrant flowers that decorated every village path. Each year, as the full moon of the harvest season rose high into the sky, the people of Nuria prepared for their most cherished celebration, the Moonflower Festival. For 3 days and nights, the kingdom became a spectacle of music, laughter, and color. From the poorest farmers to the richest nobles, everyone gathered in the capital to share their talents, display their crafts, and tell their stories. But it was not merely a festival of beauty, it was a test of heart. Long ago, it was said that the moon blessed the kingdom with a magical flower that bloomed only once a year. Whoever possessed the truest spirit, pure, kind, and courageous, would be honored during the Moonflower Festival and recognized by the king himself. It was a tradition that gave hope to the humble and reminded the mighty that true worth could not be bought or worn. Each year, the king would choose one woman whose light shone brightest, regardless of her status. Some had been dancers, others weavers, singers, or simple girls with stories too powerful to be ignored. The honor came with recognition, wealth, and even a chance to serve in the royal court, a dream for many but a distant one for most. Among the hopeful dreamers was Xena, a young girl of quiet strength and gentle spirit. She lived on the far edge of the capital in a weathered house that once held joy but now echoed mostly with silence and sorrow. Her father, once a cheerful merchant, had grown distant after the death of Xena's mother. He had remarried a beautiful woman from another province, a woman who arrived in their home with the softness of silk but the chill of a snake. Her name was Safia, and while the village whispered of her charm, Xena knew the truth that lurked beneath her polished smile. Safia treated Xena like a shadow. She praised her own daughters and adorned them with fine things while Xena swept the floors and fetched water before the morning sun rose. Every day was the same routine of hard work, spoken-down words, and stolen dreams. But Xena held one desire close to her heart, guarding it like the last coal of a dying fire. She wanted to go to the Moonflower Festival. Not to compete, not to be seen as royal, just to be seen. To have someone look at her and not see a servant. To be in the same square where stories were told, where dancers moved like water, and where the king himself looked for something more than glittering gowns and rehearsed smiles. Xena had never met the king. She had only heard tales of him, young, fair, thoughtful, and unlike the rulers of old. It was said that he could read people like open scrolls, seeing past the masks they wore. To Xena he was not a fantasy prince but a symbol of something more. Justice, maybe, or possibility. She had nothing to offer the festival but a voice that had long been silenced by fear and years of being unseen. Yet, as the moon grew full and the buzz of celebration reached every corner of the kingdom, something inside her stirred. A feeling she had not dared feed for years. Hope. She had no fine dress, no jewels, no invitation. But she had her hands, her voice, her kindness, and a spirit that had not yet broken. The Moonflower Festival was coming, and Xena would find a way to stand among the lights. Even if no one noticed her, even if her stepmother tried to keep her hidden in the shadows, she would find a way to bloom, just once, under the moonlight. She had to. Xena's world had once been filled with laughter and the sweet scent of her mother's cooking. Her mother, a kind and graceful woman, had always taken the time to listen to her dreams, to hold her close when the world felt too heavy. But that was before the illness came, before it took her mother away in the dead of night, leaving only the emptiness of an unspoken goodbye. Xena had been just a child when her mother passed, her heart too young to understand the depth of loss. Her father, a merchant who sold fine cloth from the southern markets, tried his best to fill the void, but the light of their home seemed to fade with each passing day. When her father remarried, Xena held on to a small glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this woman would fill the void her mother had left. Her name was Safia, and she was beautiful, tall, graceful, with skin that seemed to shimmer like moonlight. The villagers had always admired her, and when she came to their home as Xena's stepmother, she brought with her an air of mystery and charm that dazzled everyone. She was everything that Xena's mother had not been, elegant, poised, and regal. She spoke with an accent from the northern provinces, and her words were smooth as honey, laced with promises of a better life, of luxury, of joy. At first, her father seemed to adore her, and Xena, wanting to please him, had tried to love her new stepmother. But it wasn't long before Xena noticed the subtle shift in the household. The warmth that once filled their home was now replaced by an icy tension. Safia's beauty seemed to demand admiration, but it was clear that she cared for nothing other than her own image, her own status in the eyes of others. She adorned herself in expensive silks, and every day she would spend hours in front of the mirror, adjusting her appearance until she was satisfied. There were no soft smiles, no warmth in her touch. Instead, her eyes were always calculating, always observing the way others viewed her. Xena quickly learned that in her stepmother's eyes, beauty and status were the only things that mattered. She was treated like an outsider in her own home, a servant to the woman who had claimed her father's heart. Xena spent her days cleaning, cooking, and taking care of the house while her stepsisters, Safia's daughters, spent their time lounging in the sun, their nails painted with the finest colors, their hair braided with delicate ribbons. They were spoiled and pampered, their every wish granted, their every whim indulged. Xena, on the other hand, was always the one who was asked to do the chores, the one who was expected to work from dawn until dusk without complaint. It wasn't just the labor that wore her down, it was the way she was treated, as though she were invisible, as though her worth was tied to the task she performed. Her stepsisters never lifted a finger. They were too busy gossiping about their friends or planning their next trip to the market. Safia, their mother, encouraged this behavior. Xena often overheard her stepmother speaking to them in low, clipped tones, advising them to keep up appearances, and never let anyone see your weakness. The message was clear. Their beauty, their wealth, and their status were the only things that mattered. Xena, with her simple clothes and quiet nature, was nothing more than a shadow in their world. It was her father who caused her the greatest pain. He had once been a man of laughter and light, a man who could always make her smile even on the darkest days. But since his remarriage he had become a stranger. He no longer saw her the way he used to, as his daughter, his pride. Instead, he was under the spell of Safia, who had manipulated him with sweet words and promises of a life of luxury. She knew how to play on his emotions, how to make him feel like a king, and how to convince him that Xena was nothing more than a burden. Xena's father would often look past her as though she didn't exist, or worse, as though she was the problem. When she tried to speak, to explain how she was being treated, he would shake his head and dismiss her words, as if they were mere complaints from a child. He had forgotten the warmth of his former life, the connection he had once shared with his daughter. Instead, he was content in the arms of Safia, blind to the suffering that took place right under his nose. Xena's heart ached as she watched her father grow more distant each day. She had tried to reach out to him, to remind him of the love they had once shared, but he was too lost in the world Safia had created. He never saw the tears in her eyes or the bruises on her spirit. He never heard the cries of a daughter who had lost everything, except for the suffocating grip of a stepmother who sought to destroy her. As the days passed, Xena's spirit began to wither, but a small part of her still held on to the dream she had buried deep within her heart, the dream of the Moonflower Festival. She couldn't forget that fleeting hope, even though everything around her seemed to whisper that she was nothing. The festival, a place where beauty, heart, and talent were supposed to be celebrated, seemed like a distant fantasy now, something that belonged to the girls in the village who wore fine dresses and lived in luxury. But Xena still held that dream close, and it was in the darkest moments of her life that it flickered like a tiny, stubborn flame. The kingdom of Nyoria was alive with excitement as the Moonflower Festival drew near. The air hummed with the rhythm of preparation, musicians tuning their instruments, artists setting up their stalls, and tailors working tirelessly, stitching beautiful garments fit for the nobility. The streets were alive with chatter and anticipation, and the smell of roasted meats and sweet treats filled the market square. It was the time of year when the entire kingdom seemed to unite, where beauty was celebrated, and where the hearts of both the rich and the poor swelled with hope and pride. Xena watched from the sidelines, her heart heavy with longing. Every year, the festival transformed the capital into a place of magic and wonder, where the most talented and the most beautiful came to show off their creations. It was a spectacle she had only ever dreamed of being a part of stepping into the square, her face lit by the moonlight, her dress sparkling among the crowds. But this year was different. She would make sure of it. With a determination born of years of silence, Xena had quietly begun to gather scraps of cloth, threadbare fabrics that were often discarded by the market stalls. While Safia and her daughters busied themselves with their own lavish preparations, Xena worked in secret. Each night, when her stepmother and stepsisters went to sleep, she would sneak out to the small shed in the back of their home and begin to stitch together what little she had. Her fingers, calloused and tired from years of labor, moved with surprising skill as she pieced together the remnants of discarded silks, cottons, and linens. Xena's mother had taught her to sew when she was a child. She had once made clothes for Xena with love and care, and the memory of those days lingered in Xena's heart. She remembered how her mother had always told her that a dress was not just fabric. It was a story, an expression of who you were. A woman's heart shines through her hands, her mother would say, and Zina had carried that lesson with her, even after her mother's death. The dress was coming together, thread by thread, but it was far from finished. Zina had no fine lace or jewels to adorn it. What she had was her skill and a deep desire to be seen, truly seen, by someone other than her cruel stepmother. The dress she made was simple yet elegant, with delicate embroidery that told a story of its own. Flowers, birds, and stars, all stitched in vibrant threads. It was not the grandeur of the nobles' dresses, but it was made with love, and it was hers. But the final piece of the puzzle was still missing. Zina needed help, someone who could take her vision and bring it to life in the way she could not. It was then that she remembered the old village seamstress, Mama Kazi, a wise woman known for her skill and kindness. Mama Kazi had always been kind to Zina, offering her guidance when she was a child. Zina had been too shy to ask her for help before, but now there was no choice. She needed Mama Kazi's hands. One evening, under the soft glow of the evening sun, Zina made her way to Mama Kazi's small cottage at the edge of the village. The old woman was sitting outside, weaving baskets from dried palm leaves. Her hands moved with grace, despite her age. When she saw Zina approaching, she smiled warmly, her eyes crinkling with kindness. "What brings you here, child?" Mama Kazi asked, her voice like the gentle rustle of leaves. "I need your help," Zina said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've made a dress, but it's not finished. I need someone to help me with the final touches. Can you help me?" Mama Kazi looked at Zina for a moment, her wise eyes seeing more than the young girl wanted to reveal. She didn't ask any questions. She simply nodded and gestured for Zina to sit beside her. "Let's see what you have, my dear," Mama Kazi said. Zina opened the small bundle she had carefully carried, revealing the incomplete dress. The old seamstress's eyes twinkled as she took in the design. "A beautiful start indeed," she said. "Let's finish it together." Over the next few days, Mama Kazi helped Zina add the finishing touches to the dress. She guided Zina's hands as they embroidered the hem with tiny, intricate patterns that looked like stars twinkling in the night sky. Mama Kazi also taught her a few secrets: how to add a delicate beading to the neckline that caught the light just right, how to make the seams invisible, and how to add a subtle shimmer to the fabric that would make the dress glow when the light hit it. Zina worked tirelessly, her heart beating faster with every stitch as she felt the dress begin to take shape. It was more beautiful than she had ever imagined. Mama Kazi's presence was a comfort, her steady hands giving Zina the confidence she needed. The two women worked late into the night, and by the time the festival was just a day away, Zina's dress was complete. It shimmered like the night sky, catching the light with every movement, as though it held the very essence of the moon in its folds. Zina looked at herself in the mirror, awestruck by what she saw. For the first time in years she felt beautiful, not because of her dress, but because of the spirit with which it was made. It was her heart, her courage, and her dreams woven into every inch of fabric. As she stood there, gazing at her reflection, she knew that no matter what happened at the festival, she had already won. She had dared to dream, and for once she had created something that was entirely hers. The festival was just the beginning. 800 words white heavy checkmark. The morning of the festival arrived with a hush of anticipation in the kingdom. The sun had barely risen, but the air was already thick with excitement. Zina could hear the sounds of the bustling streets even from inside her small room. Laughter, the clinking of pots and pans, the calls of vendors preparing their wares for the evening. The Moonflower Festival was a time when everything in Uriah seemed to pause, and the whole kingdom gathered to celebrate beauty, talent, and heart. Zina had dreamed of this day for as long as she could remember, but this year she had something more than just a dream. She had a dress, her dress. With trembling hands, Zina carefully unwrapped the garment she had worked on for weeks, its fabric glowing in the soft morning light. It was even more beautiful than she had imagined. The delicate stitching, the shimmering beads, the subtle shimmer that caught the light, it was everything she had hoped for. For the first time in years, Zina felt a surge of confidence. Today she would walk into the festival and be seen. She would show the kingdom that she was more than just a servant, more than the girl who was always left behind. But her moment of hope was short-lived. As she was gently smoothing the dress, preparing to put it on, the door to her room slammed open. There stood Safia, her stepmother, dressed in a fine gown of silk and adorned with jewels that glistened in the morning light. Her face was a mask of barely contained rage, her eyes narrowed as she took in the sight of Zina's dress. "What is this?" Safia's voice was icy, her tone dripping with venom. She crossed the room in a few quick strides, her gaze locked on the delicate fabric in Zina's hands. "What do you think you're doing?" Xena froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She had hoped to avoid confrontation, but it seemed that hope was in vain. Xena stammered, but her stepmother cut her off. You think you can attend the Moonflower Festival? Safia laughed bitterly, her voice sharp and cruel. Do you truly believe you are worthy of such an honor? Before Xena could say a word, Safia reached out, her fingers curling into the fabric of the dress. With a harsh yank, she tore it from Xena's hands, and in one swift motion, the beautiful dress was ripped apart. Xena gasped in shock as the delicate threads, the beads, and the embroidery were torn to shreds, falling to the floor like 1,000 fragments of her shattered dreams. Pathetic, Safia sneered, looking down at the ruined fabric with disdain. This is what happens when you get ideas above your station. You are nothing. You are a servant, a girl who should know her place. Xena stood frozen, her breath caught in her throat. Her eyes welled with tears, but she refused to let them fall. She had worked so hard, sacrificed so much, and now it was all gone in an instant. Her dream had been torn to pieces before her eyes. Her stepsisters entered the room just as Safia continued to mock Xena. They were dressed in fine silks, their faces painted with pride and arrogance, their jewelry glinting in the morning light. They giggled as they surveyed Xena's ruined dress, their laughter a sharp contrast to the pain that Xena felt in her chest. Well, one of the stepsisters, Selena, said with a sly grin. It seems that someone got a little too ambitious. She glanced at the other, who burst into laughter at the sight of the torn fabric. What made you think you could ever compare to us? She added, flicking a lock of her perfectly coiffed hair. Xena felt the weight of their words as if they were physical blows. Her stepsisters had always been cruel, but today their mockery felt like the cruelest of all. They had been pampered, spoiled with everything they wanted, while she had been treated like nothing more than a servant. They didn't understand what it meant to fight for something, to struggle, to create something from nothing. They had never known the hunger she had felt, the hunger not just for food but for respect, for dignity, for a place in the world. But today it wasn't just their words that cut the deepest. It was the look of utter disdain in Safia's eyes. She had always been manipulative, controlling, but Xena had never seen her so cruel. The woman who had once promised a better life had only ever given her pain, and now that pain felt unbearable. Xena's heart sank as her stepmother turned her back on her, dismissing her with a final, cruel laugh. I've had enough of your foolishness, Xena, Safia said, her voice cold and final. You'll never belong here. You're nothing. Remember that. With that, Safia and her daughters turned and left the room, their laughter echoing in the hallway. Xena stood alone, surrounded by the remnants of her dress. The dream she had held onto for so long seemed to vanish in an instant. The girl who had once dreamed of the Moonflower Festival, of stepping into the light, was now a shadow in her own home. The mocking words of her stepmother and stepsisters rang in her ears, each one more painful than the last. She had nothing. No dress. No hope. No chance. But Xena was no stranger to pain. She had known loss, grief, and rejection her entire life. This was just another moment of suffering, another obstacle to overcome. In the quiet of the room, surrounded by the fragments of her dream, Xena made a silent vow. This would not be the end of her story. Her heart burned with a new fire, one that could not be extinguished. No matter what her stepmother or her stepsisters thought, she would rise again. The weight of her despair was unbearable. Xena's heart felt as if it were being crushed under the oppressive force of her stepmother's cruelty. The ruins of her dress lay scattered on the floor, an awful reminder of everything she had lost in a single cruel moment. She couldn't breathe. The walls of the small house seemed to close in on her, and the laughter of her stepsisters echoed in her mind, mocking her hopes and dreams. Her legs moved without thought, driven by a need to escape, to run from the suffocating reality of her life. She fled the house, her bare feet pounding the dusty earth as she raced toward the river. The cool waters of the river had always been a place of solace for her, a place where she could think, where she could find peace in the chaos of her life. She had spent countless hours there, dipping her hands into the water, letting the current wash away the pain and the confusion that clouded her heart. As she reached the riverbank, the weight of her sorrow finally overwhelmed her. She collapsed to her knees, her tears falling like rain, mingling with the waters of the river. The sobs racked her body, her chest heaving as she mourned the loss of her dreams, the loss of herself. I'm not good enough, she whispered between sobs. I never will be. I'll always be nothing. For what felt like hours, Xena wept, the river's gentle lapping against the shore the only sound in the quiet evening air. The The sky above her was painted in hues of gold and crimson as the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the land. Yet, despite the beauty of the world around her, she felt utterly alone. But she wasn't alone. From the shadows of the trees on the far side of the riverbank, a figure emerged. An old woman, her back bent with age, appeared as if she had materialized out of the very air itself. She wore a simple flowing gown that seemed to shimmer in the fading light, and her eyes, ancient and wise, held a depth that Xena couldn't quite comprehend. The woman's hair was silver white, braided with small beads that caught the sunlight, and she walked with a quiet grace, her movements slow but deliberate. Xena didn't notice her at first, too lost in her grief. But the woman's soft voice, like the rustling of leaves in a gentle breeze, broke through the haze of Xena's sorrow. "Child," the old woman said, her tone warm but firm. "Why do you weep so?" Xena looked up, startled by the voice. She quickly wiped her eyes, confused by the appearance of the stranger. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice hoarse from crying. I don't understand. My dreams are gone. Everything is ruined. My stepmother, she destroyed my dress. The one thing I had to call my own. I'll never be enough. I'm nothing." The woman crouched beside Xena, her wise eyes studying the young girl carefully. "Your pain is deep," she said softly, "but your heart is strong. You're not nothing. Your spirit is a flame, though it may flicker now. You've just forgotten how to make it burn." Xena's heart ached at the woman's words. She felt a flicker of something inside her, a glimmer of hope, but it was fleeting. She didn't know how to make the pain stop. She had tried so hard and now it all seemed hopeless. "I can help you," the woman said gently, her voice carrying a strange weight, as if her words held more than just kindness. "But first you must listen. Your tears are powerful, child. They are not just tears of sorrow, they are tears of creation. You have the power to rebuild what was broken, to turn your sorrow into strength. I will give you a gift, but you must use it wisely." Xena stared at the woman, her mind clouded with confusion. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling. The old woman smiled softly, her weathered hands reaching into the folds of her gown. She produced a small flower, its petals glowing with an ethereal light. The flower seemed to pulse with energy as though it were alive, its delicate glow growing brighter with each passing moment. Xena's eyes widened in awe. "This is a moonflower," the woman explained. "It is a flower of transformation, born of the moon's light. It holds the magic of rebirth, of renewal. When the moon is full, it blooms and with it, a new beginning. Take this flower, child, and keep it close to your heart. It will help you rebuild what you have lost, not just your dress but something far more important." Xena reached out, her fingers trembling as she accepted the flower. It was warm to the touch, the petals soft and smooth as if it were made of the finest silk. As she held it in her hand, a strange energy surged through her, filling her with a sense of strength and possibility that she had never known before. She could feel the magic, ancient and powerful, flowing from the flower into her, filling the emptiness that had consumed her for so long. "The moonflower will not only mend what is broken," the woman continued. "It will transform it into something far more beautiful, far more powerful than it was before. But remember, the power to change is within you, child. The flower will guide you, but it is your heart that will shape your destiny." Xena nodded, her heart racing with a mix of wonder and uncertainty. She had no idea how this flower could change anything, but she felt a sense of purpose stirring within her. For the first time she believed that perhaps, just perhaps, she could turn this moment of loss into something greater. With the moonflower in her hand, Xena stood up, the weight of her grief still heavy in her chest but now tempered by the flicker of hope that burned within her. The old woman smiled one last time, her eyes twinkling with knowing as she began to fade into the shadows, as mysteriously as she had arrived. "Remember, child," she said, her voice echoing in Xena's mind, "the power of rebirth is yours. Use it wisely." And then, just as silently as she had come, the woman was gone, leaving Xena standing alone once more, but this time with a sense of possibility, of change in her heart. The Moonflower Festival was in full swing, the kingdom alive with laughter, music and the vibrant colors of celebration. Lanterns of every shape and hue lit up the sky, casting a soft glow over the bustling crowd. Stalls lined the streets, filled with artists, performers and food vendors, their wares on display for all to admire. The air was thick with excitement and anticipation as the nobles, commoners and travelers from distant lands gathered to witness the grandeur of the annual celebration. Xena stood at the edge of the festival grounds, her heart pounding in her chest. She had never seen such a gathering before. The sights, the sounds, the opulence, it all overwhelmed her senses. Yet, despite the overwhelming beauty of the scene before her, Xena was focused on one thing: entering. Dressed in the newly transformed dress, the moonflower still tucked close to her chest, she took a deep breath and stepped into the crowd. The moment she did, it was as if time slowed down. The air felt charged, like electricity crackling around her. As she walked, people began to take notice. At first it was subtle, a glance here, a whispered murmur there, but soon it was undeniable. Heads turned. Eyes widened. There was something different about her, something radiant. Her dress shimmered in the sunlight, its colors shifting with every movement. It was a dress unlike any other at the festival. No silk, no fine jewels could compare to its ethereal beauty. The fabric seemed to glow as if touched by moonlight itself, its delicate embroidery and shimmering beads catching the light with every step she took. It was as if the very essence of the festival had woven itself into her gown. But it was not just the dress that drew attention. It was the way Xena carried herself. Gone was the timid, insecure girl who had once cowered in the shadows. In her place stood a woman radiating grace and confidence. She moved through the crowd with a quiet dignity, as though the festival itself recognized her, as though she belonged there. The whispered words of admiration followed her wherever she went. Some spoke of her beauty, others of the energy that seemed to surround her, but all agreed on one thing: she was someone extraordinary. It wasn't long before the king noticed her. He had been watching the crowd from the balcony of the grand palace, his eyes scanning the sea of revelers below. The king was young, in the prime of his life, and known throughout the kingdom for his keen sense of observation. He had an eye for more than just appearances. It was said that the king could see a person's true nature, their spirit, before anyone else. And as his gaze fell upon Xena, he felt a pull, something deep inside him that called to him to look closer. Xena moved through the crowd with a quiet elegance that caught the king's attention immediately. She wasn't the most elaborately dressed or the most adorned, but there was a quiet strength in her posture, a confidence that radiated from within. The way she held herself, graceful, poised, yet with an undeniable power, was something he had never seen before. Without thinking, the king's eyes followed her every movement, captivated by the way she interacted with the festival's energy. She wasn't a person to simply be admired from a distance. She was someone who commanded respect, someone who had something to offer. He could feel it in his bones. This was no ordinary woman. Meanwhile, Xena's stepmother and stepsisters were still moving through the festival, their attention fixed on their own self-importance. They had, of course, made their grand entrance, parading themselves in the finest silks and jewels, expecting the eyes of the crowd to fall upon them in awe. Yet, despite their efforts to stand out, they were oblivious to the presence of the transformed Xena. To them, she was just another commoner, a girl of no consequence. They laughed and whispered, their vanity blinding them to the fact that the very woman they had mocked was now walking among them, her presence undeniable. As Xena moved deeper into the crowd, she was drawn toward the central stage. Here, the festival's main event was taking place, a showcase of talent, where people from all walks of life would perform traditional dances, songs, and plays, competing for the admiration of the king and the nobility. Xena had always loved the art of dance, a skill passed down to her by her late mother. She had practiced for years but never had the chance to perform. Now, with the weight of the moonflower in her heart and the power of the flower's magic coursing through her veins, she felt a sudden surge of confidence. She approached the registration desk and signed up for the dance, not expecting anything but a chance to participate. As she stood in line, her heart raced, but the nervousness she had once known was now replaced by a calm determination. She wasn't just performing for the king. She was performing for herself, for the woman she had become, for the dream she had fought so hard to keep alive. When her turn finally came, Xena stepped onto the stage, her dress flowing around her like a cloud. The music began and she moved, her body flowing in perfect harmony with the rhythm. The crowd fell silent, entranced by the grace and beauty of her movements. Her dance was like nothing anyone had ever seen before, a perfect blend of strength and fluidity, of elegance and power. She moved with the grace of a woman who had endured hardship but had never been broken, her every step a testament to her resilience. As she danced, Xena's eyes met the king's, and in that moment, the world seemed to fade away. The crowd, the festival, the noise, it all disappeared. It was just the two of them, connected by something deeper than words or appearance. The king's gaze was intense, filled with admiration and awe. He could see beyond her beauty. He could see her spirit, her strength, her heart. When the music finally ended, the crowd erupted into applause, but Xena barely heard it. She stood still for a moment, breathing heavily, her heart pounding in her chest. The applause was not for her dress, not for her beauty, it was for the woman she had become, for the grace and power she had shown. And in that moment, Xena knew that no matter what had happened before, she had finally found her place in the world. She had found her voice, her purpose. Xena didn't need the king's attention to know that she had won. She had already conquered her own doubts, her own fears. But as she looked up and met the king's gaze once more, she knew that her journey had only just begun. The festival was in full swing, its vibrant colors and sounds weaving together in a beautiful tapestry of celebration. But there was an undeniable sense of anticipation in the air as the king made his way to the center of the grand stage. His eyes scanned the crowd, his presence commanding the attention of everyone around him. The music, the chatter, and the excitement of the day all seemed to pause for a brief moment, as if the very kingdom itself held its breath. It was the moment the people had been waiting for, the announcement of the woman who would receive the king's blessing, a royal recognition that would change her life forever. This was a moment of glory, a moment when beauty, talent, and heart were honored above all else. Nobles, merchants, and commoners alike gathered eagerly around the stage, their eyes fixed on the king, eager to hear who would be chosen. Xena stood quietly among the crowd, still basking in the glow of her performance. She had done her best, dancing not for the king's recognition but for her own release, for her own freedom. The applause had been enough, but now the king's words seemed distant, a distant thought in her mind. She had already found something much more valuable, herself. As the king walked to the front of the stage, the people parted, making way for him. His regal presence was undeniable, the heavy weight of his crown a symbol of authority, but his eyes were focused not on the nobles or the wealthy girls who waited with bated breath, but on the woman who had captured his attention the moment she entered the festival grounds. Xena. The murmurs in the crowd quieted as the king stood at the center, his voice booming across the festival grounds, cutting through the noise like a sword through the air. People of the kingdom, the king began, his voice steady and commanding. Every year we honor one woman who stands above the rest, who embodies beauty, grace, and heart. This year we have witnessed many talents, many worthy individuals, but there is one among you who has shown not only beauty and skill but the strength of spirit that truly deserves recognition. Xena's heart raced in her chest. She had not expected this. Her thoughts were still clouded with the aftermath of her performance, and now, with the king's words hanging in the air, she couldn't understand why her name was being singled out. The king continued, his eyes scanning the crowd, moving past the many noble women dressed in their finest silks and jewels, their faces painted with smiles of expectation. The women who were accustomed to winning, to being the center of attention, to having the world at their feet. But he didn't stop for them. He kept moving, his gaze searching until he finally stopped, right in front of Xena. The moment felt as though time itself had frozen. The people gasped in collective surprise. Whispers spread through the crowd like wildfire, but all Xena could hear was the thudding of her own heartbeat. Her breath caught in her throat. She could hardly believe it. There was no mistaking it, the king had chosen her. Xena, the king called, his voice resonating in the air. You have captured the heart of this kingdom with your grace, your strength, and your beauty, but above all, your spirit. You stand not just for what you appear to be on the outside, but for the resilience and power that resides within. For that, you shall be honored, and I will bestow upon you my blessing. The crowd was silent for a brief, frozen moment before it erupted into a chorus of murmurs, gasps, and exclamations of disbelief. Xena's stepmother, who had been so sure that her daughters would be the ones to gain the king's favor, stood motionless. Her mouth hung open in shock, her eyes wide with a mix of confusion and disbelief. She hadn't even realized the girl in front of her was the same Xena, the girl she had treated like a servant, the girl she had torn down time and time again. Now here she was, standing before the king, glowing with an aura of power that radiated like the moon itself. Her stepsisters too were dumbfounded. They had expected to be the ones who would be chosen, the ones who had been pampered and dressed in the finest garments. But now, standing behind their mother, they saw the truth. They were not the ones who would be honored. It was Xena, the quiet girl who had been ignored and mistreated, who had emerged from the shadows to claim her place in the kingdom. Xena's mind was spinning. How had this happened? How had the king chosen her over all the other women? She wasn't the wealthiest, the most beautiful, or the most adorned, she was simply herself. Yet, somehow she had captured the king's attention in a way that no one else had. She stood there, frozen, not knowing whether to laugh or cry, to shout with joy or fall to her knees in disbelief. The king stepped forward, his face calm but filled with admiration. He raised his hand to Xena, offering her a token, a beautiful, intricately designed necklace made of gold and precious stones. It was a symbol of his recognition, a gift that would forever tie her to the royal family. Xena, the king said, his voice softer now as though speaking only to her. This gift is a symbol of my respect for you and the honor you have brought to this kingdom. You are no longer a mere servant, no longer someone to be hidden away. You are a woman of strength, a woman of grace, and you deserve to be seen. Xena took the necklace from the king, her hands shaking. She was overwhelmed with emotion. This moment was everything she had dreamed of and more. Her heart swelled with a mix of pride, gratitude, and disbelief. She had proven herself not only to the kingdom but to herself. She had risen above the pain, the suffering, and the cruelty of her stepmother's treatment, and now, here she was, standing in front of the king, recognized for the woman she had become. But as she looked over at her stepmother and stepsisters, she saw something else in their eyes, something dark and twisted. Her stepmother's face was pale, her mouth set in a tight line. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected Xena to rise above her cruelty, to shine in a way that was undeniable. But the truth was now clear for all to see. Xena had won and no one could take that away from her. The air was thick with tension as the king, having just bestowed his royal blessing upon Xena, turned to face the crowd. His gaze lingered on her, admiration evident in his eyes, before he spoke again, his voice carrying an undeniable authority that hushed the entire assembly. Xena, he said, his tone now more serious, there is one final step to your recognition today. His eyes glinted with a sharp intensity as he addressed her directly. I ask you now to remove your veil or mask if you will, so that all may see the true beauty of the woman who has captured my heart. There is no need for disguise any longer. The request, though simple, was met with an immediate ripple of excitement and curiosity through the crowd. The nobles, the common folk, and even Xena's own stepmother were all eager to catch a glimpse of her without her veil. Until now she had been a mysterious figure, someone who had hidden her face for reasons unknown to most. But in this moment the king's words held the weight of destiny. Xena, who had once been kept in the shadows, was now about to step fully into the light. Xena hesitated for only a moment, her fingers trembling as they reached for the fabric that had concealed her face. Her stepmother's eyes were wide with fear, and her stepsisters stood in stunned silence, barely able to comprehend what was happening. Xena had been nothing but a servant to them, a mere shadow in the background, and now she was being thrust into the center of the kingdom's gaze. As Xena lifted the veil from her face, a sharp gasp echoed through the crowd. It was as though the entire festival held its breath, waiting for what would come next. The moment she revealed her face, the transformation was undeniable. There was no mistaking it. Xena was not just beautiful in the conventional sense. Her beauty was radiant, striking in its purity. It was the kind of beauty that could not be captured in a painting or confined to mere physical appearance. It was a beauty born of strength, of resilience, and of the quiet power that had been cultivated in the years of hardship she had endured. The gasps from the crowd grew louder, and whispers spread like wildfire. They hadn't expected this. They hadn't expected the girl who had been hidden away, who had been treated like an invisible servant, to be the one who would stand before them as the woman of the hour. She was not just another noble woman, she was something more, something extraordinary. Her stepmother, who had been so proud of her own beauty and her daughter's charm, could not mask her humiliation. Her face turned a sickly shade of pale as she staggered back, her knees buckling beneath her. She collapsed to the ground in a heap, unable to process what she was witnessing. The realization hit her like a tidal wave. Her cruelty had been exposed. The girl she had mistreated, the girl she had treated as less than human, was now the center of everyone's attention, and not just for her beauty but for her dignity and strength. Her own daughters stood frozen beside her, their faces a mixture of envy, disbelief, and shame. The king's eyes turned to the stepmother, his expression hardening. He had seen the humiliation in her face and the fear in her eyes, and it was now clear to him that there was something far darker at play than he had initially realized. He looked at Xena, his voice now laced with authority, demanding answers. "Tell me, Xena," the king said, his voice commanding yet compassionate. "How is it that a woman of your grace, beauty, and spirit came to be hidden away, treated as though you were beneath those around you?" His eyes shifted toward the stepmother, who was still recovering from her collapse. How could anyone, let alone a mother, do such a thing to her own child? The question hung in the air like a challenge. The crowd turned their attention from Xena to her stepmother, eager to hear the truth. The tension in the kingdom's heart was palpable, every eye fixed on the woman who had caused this injustice. Xena stood still for a moment, her heart racing with a mix of emotions. The pain of her past flooded back to her, the years of mistreatment, the cruel words, the isolation. But now she was no longer that frightened girl who had cowered in the shadows. She was a woman who had been seen, who had been recognized, and who now had a voice. She looked at her stepmother with a calmness that belied the fire that burned inside her. With a steady breath, Xena spoke, her voice clear and strong. "I was treated as less than human," she began, her words echoing in the silence. "I was forced to clean, to cook, to serve, while my stepsisters were pampered and adored. My stepmother's jealousy knew no bounds. She saw me as a threat to her own vanity, her own pride, and so she made me invisible, she made me a servant in my own home." Xena's eyes never left her stepmother, and with each word she spoke not just for herself but for every woman who had suffered in silence, for every soul that had been silenced by cruelty and injustice. "She feared me," Xena continued, her voice gaining strength. "Feared that one day I would rise above her, feared that I would be seen for the person I truly am. So, she locked me away, kept me hidden from the world, believing that if she broke me she could remain in control. But she underestimated me. She underestimated the power that lies in patience, in silence, in kindness." The crowd was silent, hanging on every word. The elders, who had watched Xena grow from a young girl into a woman of strength, began to speak out. They too shared their stories, their memories of Xena's kindness, of her quiet suffering, and of the moments when she had shown more grace and compassion than any of them could have expected under such cruel circumstances. The villagers spoke of the years she had spent without a voice, without a place, but always with a heart full of love for the kingdom. One elder, a woman with silver hair and a stern face, stepped forward and addressed the crowd. "Xena was the heart of our village long before today. She worked, she helped, she cared for others. She never complained, never asked for recognition. But now, her truth has come to light, and it is time that justice be done." The king nodded, his gaze never leaving Xena. His words were final, filled with the weight of a ruler's authority. "This is a lesson to us all," the king said, his voice ringing with clarity. "That no one, no matter their status, can be hidden away or treated as less than they are. Xena has proven that true strength comes from within, and that kindness, grace, and spirit will always shine through the darkest of times." The stepmother, still trembling on the ground, had no response. The truth was out, and nothing could erase the shame of her actions. The atmosphere in the royal hall had shifted, the tension of the earlier moments now replaced with a sense of anticipation for what was to come. The king, having made his decision, turned to Xena with a smile that was both kind and respectful. His eyes held admiration, but there was also a depth of understanding, as though he saw not just the woman standing before him, but everything she had endured and overcome. "Xena," the king began, his voice carrying over the now quiet crowd, "you have shown a strength and grace that many would have broken under. It is clear to me that your worth is not just in your beauty, but in the very core of your being. You possess the wisdom, the heart, and the spirit that is needed to help guide others." Xena felt a ripple of emotion surge through her, but she remained composed, her heart beating faster as she realized the magnitude of the king's words. This was a turning point not just in her life, but in the lives of others who would hear her story. "I would be honored," the king continued, "if you would consider a place in my court. Not as a queen but as a royal advisor, someone who can offer a fresh perspective, someone who understands the struggles of those who are often overlooked and forgotten. Your experiences, your wisdom, will be invaluable to me and to this kingdom." The words, though offered with the best of intentions, struck Xena deeply. A part of her had always dreamed of standing in the palace, of being seen for who she truly was, but the offer wasn't one of grandeur. It was an invitation to serve, to give back, to help others who might be suffering in silence as she once had. Her heart swelled with a mixture of pride and humility. The idea of a life in the palace, surrounded by luxury and power, no longer appealed to her as it might have in the past. She had learned through her hardships that true value wasn't found in wealth or status, but in the ability to make a difference, to help those who needed it most. Xena took a moment to collect her thoughts, the weight of the moment settling in her chest. Then, with a steady voice, she replied, "Your Majesty, I am humbled by your offer. I never dreamed that this day would come, but I am not seeking the throne or power. What I have endured has taught me that the greatest strength lies in helping others. I would accept your offer, but only if I can do so with the purpose of aiding those who have been forgotten, those who have been treated as I once was. If I can make a difference, if I can help someone else find their voice, then that will be more than enough for me." The king smiled at her words, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. Your heart is pure, Xena. I believe you will do great things here. Your role as a royal advisor will be a valuable one, and I trust you will bring change to this court, a change for the better. As Xena accepted, the crowd watched in awe. This was no ordinary moment. This was the beginning of something new, a shift in the kingdom's way of thinking. A servant girl, once invisible, now had the power to influence decisions, to shape the future. It was a testament to the fact that even in the darkest of circumstances, a person's true light could shine through, if only given the chance. Meanwhile, in the far corner of the hall, Xena's stepmother and stepsisters stood frozen, unable to comprehend the turn of events. They had been watching from the sidelines, their faces twisted with disbelief and humiliation. The stepmother's lips trembled as she tried to grasp what had just happened. She had expected Xena to remain beneath her, to stay in the shadows where she belonged. But now, the very girl she had tormented had risen above her, claiming a place in the royal court. The realization was too much for her to bear, and for the first time she was struck speechless. The king, turning to address them, spoke with an air of finality. As for you, he said, his voice cutting through the silence, the treatment of Xena was unforgivable. You will no longer be allowed to hold any privileges in this kingdom. Your actions have been exposed for what they truly were. From this moment on, you are stripped of your status. You will live the life of an ordinary citizen, and you will have to answer to the people for your cruelty. The stepmother and her daughter stood in shock as the king's words sank in. There was no reprieve, no escape from the consequences of their actions. They had lived in the comfort of their privilege, believing they could control Xena's fate. Now that comfort had been ripped away from them in an instant. They could do nothing but lower their heads in defeat, for the world they had once dominated had crumbled at their feet. Xena's father, who had been standing quietly in the background, his expression full of shame, now stepped forward. His eyes were filled with regret as he approached his daughter. Xena, he began, his voice trembling, I'm so sorry. I was blind. I failed you as a father. I let her manipulate me and I didn't see the pain you were going through. Please forgive me. Xena felt a wave of emotion well up inside her, but it wasn't anger, it was something deeper. There was a part of her that wanted to forgive him, to embrace him as the father she had once hoped he could be. But she knew deep down that forgiveness was not something that could simply be given. It had to be earned, and years of neglect and complicity in her suffering could not be erased by a few words. She looked at him, her eyes calm but resolute. Father, you did not see me. You chose to look away when I needed you most. And that I cannot forgive. You had your chance, but you were not there for me when I was drowning in pain. I must move forward now, and that means leaving you behind. With that, Xena turned her back on him, her heart heavy but unburdened. She walked away from the man who had once been her protector, but had failed her time and time again. She walked toward her new future, a future where she could make a difference, where she could finally be the woman she had always been meant to be. As she stepped into the next chapter of her life, Xena knew that the road ahead would not be easy. There would be challenges, obstacles, and moments of doubt. But she was no longer the girl who had been caged by fear and cruelty. She was a woman with a purpose to help others find their strength, their voice, and their place in a world that often tried to keep them down. And as she walked toward the palace, her heart filled with hope, knowing that the kingdom was about to change for the better. Xena stood on the balcony of the royal palace, her gaze sweeping across the kingdom below. The landscape stretched out before her in a sea of golden fields, the sun beginning to dip below the horizon, casting a warm glow over everything. The kingdom, once a place where she had known only hardship and rejection, now seemed vast and full of possibility. She could hardly believe this was her life now, this beautiful, peaceful scene, the palace at her back, and the weight of the past slowly lifting from her shoulders. As she stood there, her mind wandered back to the days before the festival, when she had been just a servant girl, invisible in her own home. She remembered the long hours spent toiling under her stepmother's watchful eye, her heart heavy with the weight of unspoken dreams. How many nights had she cried herself to sleep, wishing for something better, something more? She had once felt like nothing, like a shadow in the corner of a world that didn't care to notice her. But now, standing in the very heart of the kingdom, it was impossible to ignore how far she had come. The journey had not been easy, nor had it been without sacrifice. She had fought for her dignity, for her right to be seen and heard, and she had paid a price for it. Her stepmother and stepsisters had been cruel, but it was in their cruelty that Xena had discovered her strength. It had been their hatred that had forged her resolve, and in the fire of their scorn, She had emerged like a phoenix, reborn. The same fire that had threatened to burn her had been the very thing that had fueled her transformation. Her thoughts shifted to the king. When he had offered her a place in his court, he had seen something in her that no one else had. He had seen the quiet resilience, the grace in her struggle. He had recognized that it was not just her beauty, but her heart, that made her worthy of a place among the nobility. His words still echoed in her mind, a reminder that sometimes, it wasn't the loudest voice that demanded attention, but the one that spoke with quiet strength and conviction. The king had not just praised her beauty or her skills, he had honored her spirit. And in doing so, he had shown her that there was more to life than the cruel, shallow judgments of the world. Zena's reflection was interrupted by the sound of footsteps behind her. She turned to see the king approaching, his presence calm and assured. He had a way of moving that made everyone feel as though they were the only person in the room. He had been a steady presence in her life since that fateful night at the festival, always encouraging her, always offering guidance when she needed it most. "Your Highness," she greeted him, her voice soft but full of respect. The king smiled warmly, his eyes filled with admiration. "Zena," he said, his voice carrying a note of pride. "I wanted to speak with you. I've been watching you not just as a ruler, but as a man who has come to understand the value of what you bring to this court. You've taught me something important, that strength is not about power but about resilience. You have shown us all what it means to rise above adversity with grace." Zena felt a rush of emotion at his words. She had never expected to hear such praise, especially from a man as wise and respected as the king. But what struck her most was the truth in his statement. Strength, she realized, was not about physical might or the ability to overpower others. It was about surviving the hardest trials, remaining steadfast in the face of cruelty, and still finding the courage to keep moving forward. It was about holding on to your dignity, even when the world tried to strip it away. "I did what I had to do, Your Majesty," Zena replied quietly. "But I couldn't have done it without the kindness of others along the way. I owe a great deal to the people who saw me for who I truly am. And to you for giving me the chance to show the world that I am more than what I've been through." The king nodded, his expression thoughtful. Kindness, dignity, and patience, they are often overlooked in a world that values power and wealth. But you, Zena, have shown that these are the true marks of strength. You are proof that sometimes, the most enduring forces are those that cannot be seen with the eye, but felt with the heart. Zena's heart swelled with gratitude, but there was still something lingering at the back of her mind. As she looked out over the kingdom, she couldn't help but think of the many others who still lived in silence, suffering in the shadows, just as she had once done. She thought of the women who were oppressed by cruel stepmothers or husbands, of the children who were ignored or mistreated, of the countless voices that were never heard. She had risen, yes, but what of them? Would they too find their way into the light? The king seemed to sense her thoughts. "You have the power to help them, Zena. Your story has already inspired many. There are others who will come to you, seeking the same hope and courage that you found within yourself. You have a gift, one that can change this kingdom for the better. Do not let it fade." Zena turned back to the horizon, her mind swirling with the possibilities of the future. She knew that her journey was just beginning, that the path ahead would be full of challenges and uncertainties. But for the first time in her life she felt truly free. Free from the cruelty of her stepmother. Free from the weight of her past. Free to live on her own terms, to use her voice and her strength to make a difference. And as she stood there with the king at her side, she realized that perhaps the spirit of the moonflower, the one who had guided her through her darkest moments, would one day return for others. Those who had suffered in silence, those who had waited for someone to hear their cries. Zena smiled to herself, her heart filled with hope. The kingdom had changed and so had she. And together they would create a new world. One where every woman, every child, every voice could rise above the shadows. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the moonflower's light seemed to shine a little brighter, a gentle reminder that even in the darkest times, there was always the possibility of a new beginning.